And so, welcome everyone to another gathering of Presenting Our Presence. My name is Florence Glanfield, and I'm a citizen of the Métis Nation of Alberta. And I am looking forward to this conversation with a colleague who is fairly new to the University of Alberta. 3/4 of a year is how we are framing it these days. So thank you, and looking forward to the conversation, Marek. I'll turn it to Michelle, and then we'll invite you to introduce yourself in whatever way is comfortable for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. Yes, hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Michelle Durocher. I'm from the Fishing Lake Métis settlement. And at the U of A here, I work in the president's office. I am the executive operations coordinator. And I've almost a year into my role in this podcast as well. So, yeah, we've got some anniversaries coming up. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. I'm really excited to hear more about Marek's work and research. So I'll turn it over to you, Marek, to introduce yourself and get us started.
Marek Tyler. So my name is Marek Tyler. My mom is Linda Young from Onion Lake First Nation, or Cree Nation. And that nation is right north of Lloyd. Right above Lloydminster, 50 kilometers, and it divides our reserve in half. I remember back in the day, if you're at the arena or the community center, and you phoned across the street on the other side of the border from the payphone to the gas station or to the store, it would be a long distance. So that was some back in the days. I'm just kind of dating myself there. Like, I remember when you have to use the telephone booth and put a couple extra coins in there to make a long distance call across the street. My mom is Linda Young from Onion Lake Cree Nation. My father's Rod Tyler from Regina, Saskatchewan. He's non-Indigenous. He grew up in Saskatchewan. I grew up in Saskatchewan. I moved out here to Alberta in the 90s after I got fired from a band. I was playing drums, and they fired me after halfway through the first rehearsal. Halfway through, it was this country band from North Battleford. Halfway through, they said, "I don't think this is going to be. This is a good fit. I don't think it's going to work." And bless their heart for not saying, you don't know what you're doing quite yet, and we're gonna have to find someone who does. So my dad goes, so this doesn't happen again. What can we do? I'm like, I should probably go to school to learn how to do this right. So I moved out to Edmonton in my early 20s to go to music school. Moved up to Yellowknife right after that. After graduating from music school at Grant MacEwan. I was a house drummer for 4 or 5 years. Oh, that's a bit of a lie. Sorry, I'm maybe 3 years up in Yellowknife. And that was the best part, because you kind of took all of these practices that you've been kind of learning over all this time in school, and then all of a sudden you're in real life. You're performing as a professional drummer with all these new musicians. And I had, all these years, six nights a week to kind of execute a lot of this theory that you've gained, and to cut the fat of the theory that you didn't need, and really what you need to be a professional drummer in a professional environment, just to become a pro. So I played every night for quite a while up there. Moved back down here in the beginning, like in 2001, and I realized that not only do I like playing music, but there's some sort of like administrative thing in me that I really like. That's kind of a weird thing. It's like, wow, I kind of like administration. So I took an administrative course at Grant MacEwan. And I was back out on the road touring as a musician, came off the road, and I needed a job real bad. So I got a job at Mountain Equipment Co-op. And I got a job at Mountain Equipment Co-op, and I just got off the road, and I was cleaning up the change rooms, I think. and this wonderful redhead came around the corner, and we just hit it off right away, and we just became best friends. 23 years later, we're still best friends and now married. But what I didn't know when meeting her at that mountain equipment co-op, it was in a an old Safeway, and it's the same building that her parents met while working both at the same time at Safeway, like in the 70s. So just a bit of a, something special about that place, that location. We lived in Victoria about 12 years after that we lived in Montreal, and then we lived in Victoria. I was there about 12 years, almost 15, going back and forth at the end with contracts. But when I wasn't on tour as a musician, I started working in friendship centers and going to school. So I did my graduate work in, again, extending that administrative calling, we'll call it, into business, specifically Indigenous business and leadership at SFU. We moved back to Edmonton about 7 years ago, and we bought a house and did all of that, and it's been wonderful being back. And I remember being back for the first time, and it was really cold, and you're walking along the river, and it's really cold, and I go, and my nose just gets that shot of really cold air, and you're like, oh, I'm home. Like that was like, and I've been home for a couple of weeks, but I hadn't had like that at home feeling of, oh, it's cold out. Okay, I got this. I remember this because I've come soft. I was soft. I've been in, getting fat and soft on the West Coast. I had to come back home to remember. So yeah, that was 7 years ago. I got 2 dogs and a cat, and a wonderful wife, and I'm happy to be here at U of A. Still playing music quite a bit, working radio, and working at U of A. So yeah, that's a lot about me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I love the story of the relationality too between your your spouse and their parents, and yeah, that is really powerful. Land has a lot to do with teaching about relationality and place, right? So Marek, there's a couple of avenues. I mean, I'm interested in is a lot about your music. And I know in the fall, I had the opportunity to attend an opening of music that you've been involved in. And I wonder if you could talk a bit and share with us about the research that you've done and what I'm going to call the knowledge mobilization that you've been doing with your work around stories of is it your great grandfather? Your
Great grandfather.
Yeah. So love to hear that. And then how you think about that in relation to your work at the University of Alberta.
Yeah, I think it's all connected. So as a drummer, being a drummer is like being a guy with a friend with a truck. Everyone needs a friend with a truck. So everyone needs a drummer. So I would just go on tour constantly because one, I liked being on the road, as a young 20-year-old, like, let's go, let's go, let's go. And I liked learning all the different styles, and I liked working with people and kind of, taking their songs and shaping them and arranging them and building momentum and dynamics into them and creating a presentation out of them. I really loved that problem solving, just loved it. So I did that for a long time, just, back of the stage. When I moved back back from Victoria here, I had started like reconnecting with being, bringing like that, I'll call it like my advantage to art, which was my cultural teachings and protocols. And why I bring that up is that I was a drummer playing, contemporary drums, but there was always a part of me that had that hand drum sound in my head. And there's something very special about that relationship with that drum. So I came back to Edmonton and I started a band with my cousin and my friend Matthew. And it was the very first time that I could implement these protocols that I had learned working in friendship centers. I had learned working with community. I had learned, you know, collaborating or co-developing ideas with community. I brought that into music. You know, what that looked like was advisors. Okay, so we're gonna represent ourselves as Nehiowak. You know, we should ground what we're doing, what is very public, in our teachings, and we can do that by having elders or knowledge keepers, you know, guide us, and we can report back to them. And if we have questions about something, we can ask them for their support, and then the protocols that go into that, and the protocols that go into that ongoing relationship. So that was the very first time I was able to do that, was with this new project. And unfortunately, you know, right before COVID, that project started sunsetting. Now, we were fortunate enough that we had gained enough national exposure, and we'd built up this larger network amongst industry, that I knew when I brought the next project to industry, that it would be just a little easier for me this time around. As where before, you're cold calling people for support. I have a project, I have a band, whatever it might be. So COVID came along, and I was talking to my manager at the time, and he goes, you know, one day you should document your mom's protocols in contemporary art. And I asked him why, and he goes, well, do you remember when Spotify asked us to curate that playlist, and they wanted to call it music by us for us, and you know, you asked your advisors, like, can we call this playlist that? Or are we going to be, is it okay? And the advice was back from your mom was like, you don't own the music. It's not yours. You're just there. You're just there to support. So here's a word that you can use instead of calling it music by us for us. It's not yours. And I forgot the name of the playlist now, but what I really liked about the process and what drove Spotify crazy was that it took 4 days for me to name that podcast, because I had to go through protocol. And by that, I had to make my offering. I had to sit with the question and exhaust the question in my head over 3 or 4 days before I could actually ask my mom. And why that's important for me is that it helps me ask a really good question. It's, you know, when you're making soup, and you just do it real slow, and it simmers and simmers, and the taste gets better and better and better. For me, an answer is the same way. Once you sit with that answer for 4 days, or that question for 4 days, it resolves and resolves and resolves. So the question is very short, but it's a really good question, and you get the best information back. So for me, it was like learning to generate a really good question in research. So I did that. I offered protocol, and I asked my mom this stuff, and then she said, you know, moving forward, like we're gonna have to do protocol again, because this is a new project. I'm like, oh, okay, that's a good point. COVID happens. I don't know what to do, because I couldn't leave the basement. And as a drummer, my job was just to, you know, support and help people create work, but you have to do that together. I couldn't do it this time. So my mom goes, why don't we listen to these old recordings of your great-great-grandfather, Zappa and Harper, her Zappa and Harper, the person that raised her before she went to residential school. Why don't we listen to these recordings of him and see if anything inspires you? So we did. And right away, I was like, I don't understand. I don't understand it, because I'm not a fluent Cree speaker, Nehiweoan speaker. And she's like, you know, it's interesting. I don't understand much of it, or all of it either, because he speaks in this old Cree. We need more people here to help out. So that was the beginning of the research. We invited my Uncle Dale Oasis, and Dr. Diana Steinhauer, and my mom and myself, and the four of us started listening to these teachings. And before we, then, my uncle goes, you know what, before we get going, because you're working in this way, in a cultural way, we're going to have a feast. We're going to have a feast before we get going. Okay, okay. So now I had to start thinking about the patience of wanting to get something done. I was now in Spotify's shoes. Like, oh, let's just get going. We can just get going. And like, yeah, slow, like, take your time, take care of yourself. So my uncle, during COVID, held a feast that only he and his partner attended, and they held the feast on behalf of this new project, this new research. Research isn't the right word. I know Florence, you and I were talking earlier. Research is a kind of a challenging word in this environment. So I'm going to say journey. I like what you said earlier about knowledge mobilization. I think it's in that context. So he feasted on behalf of the project, and once that was done, let's move forward. So we listened to these recordings. We started identifying themes in the recordings, like family, community, culture. And you could almost hear my great-great-grandfather, Zappan Harper, kind of pleading to the community around that table to say, listen, we need to strengthen our relationship with the Muniak, like with the non-Indigenous people. We are all the same. We're all equals. We need to strengthen that. So for me, the first song that came to my mind was like, well, that's a round dance kind of feel to me. Like that's, we all get together and we start strengthening our community through round dance. And it's a social commitment. It doesn't matter if who you are, where you're from, or you just get together and dance. So I thought, oh, what we could do is every time that he comes up with a teaching or a theme, let's identify a family dance or a social dance or a social song or a powwow song or a powwow dance that reflects those teachings. So we did that. We identified a bunch of teachings in the recordings. We identified what songs or dances might reflect those teachings. And then I had an entire creative process on how to reinterpret those songs or those dances and then offer them back to my great-great-grandfather. And then we documented the entire process all the way through. So if you're going to collaborate with a dancer or another singer, what are the protocols? What is the process that you have to work with to get to that end, to get to the part of music? So how does that all mirror, in my opinion, the work that that happens at the VPR office, like this area of research? Well, for me, how it mirrors is that we need to build that relationship first. For me, I had to build a relationship with my advisors and my family, people I had been out of touch with for a long time. Then we had to come together and co-design or co-develop an idea that we all felt comfortable with. And I had to figure out the protocols that would help guide each step of learning what was being told, each step of collaborating with other artists or other knowledge keepers, and doing all the creative work. And then I had to, so that's kind of like the ethics in when you're working in research. Like what kind of board, or what kind of governance are we putting together on this? Who's on the advisor, all that. So it's a very similar thing. Then we get to the end, like you do all the work, the wonderful stuff, the fun stuff. But at the end, I have to publish. So I don't publish. I wouldn't publish this work in, research journals, academic journals. But for me, publishing was offering the songs and offering the music and offering the experience back to community. You do that in a public way by having them come to a show or releasing an album or releasing a video. So I was publishing work that way. But every step of the process, from pre-engagement, the co-development stage, to relationship building, to the collaborative process, the actual, like if we're thinking about the life cycle of research, the actual part of research. But for me, it was collaborating, the collaboration part, the creative part, and then the publishing. And all of that was informed by protocol. And all of it was documented for my family to have and to hold. And all of it is available to my family if they want to work in a cultural way when creating contemporary art. It just happens to be electronic forward music. But for me, it is about process, process, process.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I don't I'm trying to think of another word, but it's brilliant. And one of the things that I love about it is how you're taking what is in your work, in what you do daily, which in my mind, I guess I think of as very academic and colonial, and you're applying all of these traditional protocols, these traditional knowledges to that kind of work, combining it together, and it just makes it so much more meaningful. And oddly enough, it makes me understand it better because as someone who is not a researcher, as someone who is not, at the university in that kind of world, in that kind of capacity, that's not something I think of daily. That kind of like, what is who is the project lead? Who is the, that's not my jargon. That's not my life. That's not my world here. But it's so funny that now I'm like, oh, I understand more about how that world works because of the hearing it through the application of traditional knowledge sharing and protocol, which I do understand.
Mm.
Which is that's why I'm like, that's brilliant. And it's so peaceful and beautiful, and it takes something that was so foreign to me and makes it relatable. And I feel like that is probably I'm not the only one who feels that way. And probably that's a shared experience that I'm having with other people who I don't know, that is happening as you've been sharing this work from the time that, it was in the inception to the creation to the finalization of it, that the people that were involved in your family on that side learned how it's applicable in this academic world as well. Is there any feedback from your family or from your community that you would like to share with us? Because I'd love to know more about how all of this was received.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The first thing that jumps to my mind is I used my eagle feathers. I wanted the sound of feathers. So if I had you can't see you can see the drums behind me, but that's a hi-hat right here. I'm gonna hit it. But it was so loud and abrasive, as you can tell. But what I wanted to do was there was a story that my late aunt had given me. She said, when I danced fancy, I wanted to carve through the air like an eagle. So I have been taking working with a fancy dance performance on YouTube, taking all of their movement and notating their movement into music. So every time that their foot hit the ground, that became a bass drum. Every time they might have moved their shoulders, it became something else, like something bright and flowy. And in drums, the hi-hat, again, or the ride, it would have that high sibilant stuff. But for me, it was too abrasive. So I was like, well, you know what I could do is I could use eagle feathers and record eagle feathers by going over and over again. and it could simulate some of the sounds that I would usually use here, but instead I'd use eagle feathers. So I did that, and I was really excited about it. And then I phoned mom and I was like, Mom, check this out. I want to like this is, and she's like, you can't do that. I'm like, what? She's like, no, those are ceremonial feathers. I don't feel comfortable you doing that. I'm like, well, what do I do? And she's like, I don't know. Go to Michael's and buy some feathers there and tape them together. And that, so when you asked earlier, how was it received? It was constantly getting questioned. Like, are you allowed to do that? Like, are you taking ceremony and putting it into the public realm? And that's a really interesting question to start asking yourself when we're doing this work. When it comes to like ceremonial teachings, how far are we going to go in publishing and making that information available to people? So for mom, who was my advisor, and I had adhered to her, we had exchanged protocol. I had to listen to her advice. She's like, I don't feel comfortable with you using ceremonial feathers that you gifted to you, that you've brought into ceremony in this environment. So you're going to have to figure out a workaround. I was like, oh, okay, I can do this. The funny part is, and is that those feathers from Michael's, they're all like different colors. They didn't sound near as good. It was like they just sounded cheap. Those eagle feathers sounded so good, but I'm not allowed to use them. So to answer your question, how is it being received? The process was being challenged and questioned the whole time, which is the right thing to have. If I had been rubber stamped, if someone just rubber stamped everything and gave approval for everything, the work would not have turned out the way it is. I would have, I don't think it would have been as strong. So I think when we're doing this work, when we're collaborating with people, involving people in the process is the most important part. What had happened at the end, what actually happens, like the presentation of information, if your process is solid the whole way through, the presentation of information, the shows, the publications, whatever it might be, I don't know how much it holds weight, and it's important to do and to celebrate that work and celebrate your collaborators. But for me, it's much more important having people there to help with the work and question what you're doing the whole way through.
Yeah, I can see that. It's so funny that you say like it sounded cheap. It's I'm like, yeah, it's like, oh, it doesn't have that power that I wanted, that I was getting before. But I just think it's so good that your mom in that space was like, I'm not just going to tell you yes. I'm not going to just tell you it sounds good. And I'm going to be honest with you about, how I feel about it and everything, even though I'm sure she knew, oh yeah, it does sound good.
Yeah.
But even though she knows not everybody's going to know that those are ceremonial feathers, it just in her, in her heart, she knew like, no, I don't, that's not something that you need to be sharing. And to respect something like that, and go back and try something else, that's part of it, right? Is when you learn a song, when you learn a dance and you accept the criticism and you learn from it and you continue on. Like I said, those are the familiar things to me. And I guess in the academic world, it would be like, oh, I wrote this much and someone's going to review it now. And they're going to tell me how much of that writing is usable or not usable. Or, you have that, yep. that kind of comparison of how things work in an academic world versus in that kind of protocol world.
Florence, that question, like, when people are doing research, do they have those same checks and balances involved in their research, or is research done in a silo? Like, how are they not using feathers in their research?
Well, mostly we would not we would not include the ceremonies as part of the research, right? It's part of the process, but in the writing, we would not do that. So what I find so interesting is that it's just how you went back and the checking, right? So if you're engaged with communities and research, then you're checking all the time with communities about like, this is how it's going to be worded. What does it sound like? How does, and prior, like we've just learned so much about research in the last, I'm going to say 25 years in working with our communities and individuals. So it's a lot different now than it was. But I was thinking, Marek, as well, given the role of ceremony in your work, the title of the project is called ASCO, and I'm ASCO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Say it. You want to feel the breath in your hand. Asco. Like that.
Okay.
Asco.
And I was wondering if you are able to share the teachings around the word, because that for me as well is that this is the powerful thing that we are learning as Indigenous scholars is as we bring language in, there are the nuances of our languages are actually providing a more fulsome understanding of processes and life. So given that your great-grandfather's stories are present here, the stories of your late auntie, the stories of your mother, the stories of your uncles, right? What are you able to share the teachings of the word?
Sure. So that's a great question because it was my uncle Dale Oasis, Nisis Oasis. We were in ceremony. I was supporting him at his Sundance. I was Escapios. Escapios, as I understand it, the word Escapios means being a helper, being available, being on one knee, ready to go, be support. So I was doing Escapios work for him, and I have for a long time, but at Sundance, and he knew about the project, and I had asked him, with protocol, I said, Uncle, we're going to have to give this project a name at some point. We're going to name the project, like asking a name for your nephew. Like my nephew's coming to ceremony. I like to give them a name. It was the same idea. It was the same thing. This just happened to be a music project. So because he had guided the work so much, he told the story of how I started following our ways. We started following following down a path to a new journey. I started learning about the deeper teachings of Sundance and the Sundance community and everything that goes into that commitment. While we're at Sundance, just before he was about to go into the big lodge, he goes, I think I've got a name for you. It's called Asco. And then he taught me that you want to feel the breath in your hand, Asco. And he's like, it means follow. It means the action to follow something. You're following something. Asco, follow that. Asco, that. Follow that. What I love about that word and why I think it's so powerful, because it's a living word. It's not like there's something energetic about it. Maybe that's why I love our language so much, and I'm learning so much more about our language, is that our language is so powerful and energetic that one word, one sound, one vowel means so much. So when it comes to the translation between English and Nehioeoan, that intersection between the translation is where the magic is for me, of trying to take an idea that's energetic, that's alive, and then move it into a language the English language that is very set. It's like it's very rigid. It's noun. It's a noun based language, and say like it means asco is the act of following something. So what is that in English? I don't know yet. I don't know what is the act of following. You know, I don't know. But that's why it's so that's where the magic is. Magic for me is the intersection between our ways, like the intersection between me, my mom's side, and the intersection between me, my father's side. Nehio and Munio for non-indigenous. That intersection is where the magic is, and I think it's alive and well in the languages. It's alive and well in in the people who have like myself who have um, multiple backgrounds, multiple cross not intercultural, I guess we'll say. So for the teaching for me is to rely on ASCO, rely on following something and just keep going down that path. And I really like that about that. It's an inviting word. It's an inclusive word. My one of my elders once said, inclusion dispels myth. And I remember that one a lot because my job is to include both sides of me, the non-indigenous and the indigenous in me, and be proud of that and to keep going down that path, to follow that spirit.
Wow, that's so powerful. Thank you for that. And and then in what ways, Marek, given that you've worked at the University of Alberta for 9 months, coming up to an anniversary, and like Michelle said, we're going to celebrate anniversaries here in the next few months. In what ways has this experience and the experiences of your living shaped the work and the ways in which you engage in the work at the University of Alberta?
That's a good question. I think on the reconnecting with I started realizing how fortunate I was to be Indigenous when I was able to bring the soft skills that I had learned as a cultural young person with my family to the professional environment. And no one else around the table knew how to do that. The nuance of, as we were talking earlier, of not speaking over someone, letting them finish their thought. If we can do that, if we can continue to work in a cultural, with that respect for our elders and our community in the area of research, we're going to be available and vulnerable, which are strengths, my favorite strengths, characters of strengths, available and vulnerable to listen and to keep listening until they've exhausted their idea, what they needed to say, as opposed to just talking over someone to get what you're thinking out while they're trying to tell you something. Then at that point, the knowledge transfer really does kind of cease. Maybe it might, I'm not sure. But those cultural teachings that I learned as a kid, learning how to shake hands in a room, learning how to introduce yourself, clockwise, learning how to talk to the elders first, making sure that they had tea and coffee and available to them, making sure they didn't have to get up to do anything because it's really hard for them. When we bring those teachings that we learn as kids into a professional environment, all of a sudden you start building relationships, stronger relationships with the people that you're working with. And I didn't understand that before. But now being a professional and bringing those teachings into, to the boardroom, into the classroom, into these conversations, I think people become much more available and vulnerable because, and we start, leaning into those characteristics, those strengths. Number two is I want to grow, in our work at the U of A, I want to grow old together. And what I mean by that is when we work in a cultural way, in a way of protocol, we're not investing so much into what's happening right here, right now, that extractive exchange. We're actually investing in relationship for a long time. And I get very excited about that, Florence, and Michelle. We have an opportunity to grow old together because we've made a cultural commitment together. And that's much more powerful and important to me. That process. And then the third thing I wanted to kind of just bring to it is that, I had it in my head and now it's gone. It'll come back at some point. But I often think about the story that my uncle Dale gave me, which was that we can't put our teachings into the box of institution. It doesn't work. It's very hard for our teachings to be alive, our language to be alive, when they get boxed into the English language and the language is no longer alive. It's now English. So if we are going to do this work together, we have to put the languages, the information side by side. Our Nehio and our Nehiowak language, our teachings, and the institutional teachings, and put them side by side. And they are just as important as each other. One's not stronger than the other. Put them side by side. But the best part is looking for the aha moment between the teachings, so that we're like, oh, right. As Michelle said earlier, I know what you're talking about because I've had those similar experiences and how what that means in research. I've had that cultural experience. Now I see what you're talking about in research. And so her aha moment in between there, that for me is the magic again. I think that's the most important part, is if we can continue to be available to put the two pieces of education side by side and not talk down to either one, but understand that they are just as important as each other. And if we're just looking for the aha moments. And why I like that is that non-Indigenous people, they don't have to be burdened. They don't have to feel like they have to judge how culturally something is, because they're looking for the aha moment for themselves as well. So they don't have to go, oh, I am only non-Indigenous and this is the only thing that I know, and I can't relate to that. I can't judge that. I don't understand that. But what they can do is somewhere in the middle is find that aha moment that Michelle had. Say, oh, I get that. I understand what you mean. That like when you do cultural protocols, you're starting to set up ethics or a contract. They're very similar when they go down the way. So that's what I guess, thinking back to the work I've done as an Indigenous person in music and learning about my family, reconnecting with my ways and bringing those to the professional environment is realizing that, if we want to decolonize, specifically education, let's put the education side by side. Let's not try and fit one inside the other. Just put them side by side and look for the aha moment between them. Oh, we're running late now, aren't we? Sorry, I can talk forever.
Well, Marek, thank you for this time with us this morning. You've left me speechless. I'm not sure, but I really appreciated the teachings you've offered us today and for this session. And thank you. And I'll turn it over to Michelle, and then we'll invite you to end off the recording. Thank you. Michelle?
Thank you, Florence. And yes, thank you, Marek, for this very insightful and incredible podcast episode today. It meant a lot. which I always go into these knowing I'm going to learn something, and I'm going to enjoy a really good conversation. I feel like today there's extra knowledge that has been gained, and not just about you or what you do, but about myself and about our culture and our world. So, hi, thank you so much. I'll let you close us out.
Well, I appreciate that. I remember the last thing I wanted to say, and I was like, I want to say this, I want to say this, I want to say this. You know, you always forget one. Like, you know, when you're in circle and everyone starts introducing themselves, you're like, oh, I'm going to say that about myself. I'm going to say that about myself. And by the time it comes to you in circle, you're like, oh, I forgot everything. So that just happened earlier for me. So I remember the thing I wanted to say is that we have, Florence and Michelle, we have an opportunity to learn in public. And why that's important to me was back to the Sundance I was speaking to earlier. I was lighting some smudge with you know, the matches, and I was lighting the smudge, and I went to blow on it. And my uncle, in front of everyone, in front of all of my aunts and uncles, in front of all the kids, he goes like, no, you don't want to make it rain. Use a feather or your hand or something, or your hat. And I was like, oh, right, of course. You know, I know that. But he did it to me in front of everyone. And I realized that for me, my job isn't to know everything, but to learn in public, which is really important, so that people can see, you know, the teachings, someone learning. And so my job as a musician is to learn in public on stage. My job as in radio is to learn in public while curating, and my job is in this environment is to learn in public. So what I've learned from today in public from you is making opportunity for people to have a conversation and providing a good space for people to do that and to follow through on that commitment. I understand that you're 53 shows in or something now. Like, that's amazing. I've never done anything like that, and I'm learning from you in public that I can do more to activate our voices in our communities. Merci.